we're going to get started here. First thing to note, I guess, is this week we're talking about Chapter 9, and then we're going to keep going next week. But the thing is that next week is Thanksgiving, so there's no class on Monday. So don't come to class on Monday. Don't come see me during office hours on Monday. I won't be here. No one has classes next Monday. So today, Chapter 9, and then next week, I will record the Thursday video will be recorded instead. The Thursday class will be recorded. So, normally just because of processing time of my processing software and YouTube, it takes a bit of time. So it's either going to be available late on Thursday or Friday morning, lunchtime max. You'll have access to next week's class. And then if you think, well, there's certain things that are not clear and I'd rather ask questions in person, well, the following week when we get back, so not next week, but 2 weeks from now, if you have questions on anything that deals with next week's material, you can always ask it the week after. There's no issues there. But we're going to keep going through as if you guys had class next week. We're not going to say, oh, whole week off, no material, just take the week off. So you still have a pre-week quiz like every other week that is due on the Monday. But if you don't want to work Monday because it's Thanksgiving, well, anywhere between tomorrow and Sunday, you can do it. So you can do it tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or the weekend. It's really up to you. So that's still due, and you're still expected to go through the information next week. If there's anything, we'll clarify it, but otherwise it's more as if you had like an online class next week instead. Okay? Any questions for that? So today we're going to talk about unemployment. And talk about its calculations, how we could kind of make it skew the information to some extent, use it to our advantage if we're a politician, and just so you guys are aware of different things that could be manipulated, but not really manipulated, but said in a way that makes it sound better. So a typical question that I have on the final exam or another exam is deals with two politicians, so we'll get into that. Before I get started, is there any questions on this, like the pre-week quiz or anything else as you're reading through the material? Anything that wasn't clear in this whole kind of segment of unemployment? No? It's pretty straightforward, so I might not take the whole class. It's not that complicated to understand overall, but it's easy to make some mistakes. So for the practice quiz, I know that there's different versions to it, but there is a question that you may have gotten because I kind of made many versions of that question, which dealt with calculating unemployment rate, and you were given the number of people unemployed, the number of people employed, and then you had to calculate the unemployment rate. So one of the examples of that was you have 5 million people unemployed and 95 million people employed. How many people, what's the unemployment rate in this case? Yeah, it's 5%. So the examples I gave for this one, I kind of treated them all equal in the sense that they were all easy to calculate without a calculator in a short period of time, because a pre-week quiz, you don't have a ton of time. So I just wanted to make sure you're able to calculate it nice and fast. So I didn't have like tricky numbers or anything else. But one of the answers to this question was taking 5 divided by 95. It gave you a certain answer. And that is not the right answer, because when we calculate the unemployment rate, it's always going to be equal to the number of people unemployed over the amount of people in the labor force Any questions there, guys? No. And labor force is also equivalent to saying the number of people unemployed plus the number of people employed. That is the labor force. So, the big thing to keep in mind in all of this is this you clearly have to know. Labor force participation and other metrics I don't focus on as much. It's still interesting, but this is the one, if there's one equation that you have to remember from this chapter, it's this one. Because you'll have to understand it and you have to be able to play around with it. So it could be a simple question like you had in the pre-week quiz, or it could be a more elaborate one. The thing that we have to keep in mind in this whole grand scheme of things is in Canada or anywhere else in a certain time period, we have total population. And out of that total population, we have some people that are known to be in the working age, and some people that are not in the working age. So if you're 12, you're not in the working age. And out of the people in the working age, you have people that are in the labor force or not in the labor force. And out of the people in the labor force, you have the employed people and you have the unemployed people. So when we zone into the unemployment rate, or when we talk about people with jobs and people not having jobs, we're only kind of zooming into this small portion over here. And zooming into that small portion is interesting, but it has its potential problems. So zooming into this small portion here is interesting in the sense that unemployed people are people that would like to work. So we're finding, when we find this 5% unemployed, we're saying, well, out of everyone that wants to work, 5% cannot find work. That's pretty much what we're saying when we talk about the unemployment rate. And we'll talk about natural rate of unemployment in a second, but that's what we're focusing on. However, there's a lot of people else that we're not focusing on. Not in the working age is not a big deal because we're not really going, when we talk about recessions and everything else, we won't really talk about what 12-year-olds are working more or working less. They shouldn't be working, But when we talk about not in the labor force, though, this is super important to keep in mind. And that long type of answer question that often comes back, like it's been there almost every year. So it's the kind of question that you'll see. And instead of having you guys scramble to search for it, I'll just give you a very similar question. Like I'll tell you pretty much what it is. So in preparation for the final, I definitely suggest you guys to work on that. Anyways, so why is this important to consider not in the labor force? Well, who is not in the labor force? Yeah. Discouraged workers. So what we use this term a lot, discouraged workers, in this chapter, but what's a discouraged worker? Because it's fun to know the key word, but like if your mom would ask you who's not in this kind of calculation, you say, oh, that didn't count discouraged workers. Should say what are you talking about? What is that like? So what's another way we can say discouraged workers?
People who timed out.
People who
timed out.
Timed out in what sense?
At a particular time frame of looking for a job. Let's say maybe more than a year you've been looking for a job, you're basically not considered unemployed anymore.
Okay, so people still not able to find work. But at the same time, you might not have unemployment benefits, but if you're still searching for work, you're not discouraged yet. So you're not out of the labor force. You could still be actively searching for work, but no longer have access to unemployment benefits. Or you might be fresh out of school, don't have enough work experience to be able to have unemployment benefits, but be searching for work. So that's not necessarily there. So, yeah.
People who've given up, right? Have given up searching?
Yeah, so exactly. Discouraged workers, they don't search for work. You know, like if you're on welfare and you're not even searching for work anymore, you don't count. You're a discouraged worker. You're one of those guys. Anyone else? Not in labor force? Yeah.
At the same time, it's a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Army personnel count into this?
Army personnel counts and not in the labor force. Don't ask me why, but that's just the way it is. Probably one N, right? Personnel, I'd say, yeah.
Are other government officials considered labor?
Yeah, like unless you work for the Army, that's a different story, but like if you're the minister of something, yes, you are employed. I don't know why Army, maybe it's because you go abroad to some extent. I'm not, honestly, I'd have to look into the reasoning behind it. There has to be one, but I just don't know. That's just how they classify it. Yeah?
Almost all of us full-time students.
Yeah, exactly, students.
Does it have to be full-time?
Okay, that's the question I always get. So, if you think about it, which category do you fall into? Are you employed, unemployed, or not in the labor force? So, for you to count as unemployed, let's say you're a student here, and you say, well, I'm currently looking for a job, blah, blah, blah. So I am unemployed. Well, for you to count as unemployed, you have to be someone searching for a job and be willing to work quasi full-time for that job, if that's offered to you. Huh?
Would that include co-ops?
Well, co-ops are just like a summer thing. But that would mean like you're working year-round. You're looking for a year-round job that is quasi full-time. That would be kind of like an unemployed person. So as soon as you're a student, unless you're offered like a really killer job, if you're offered just a okay job, you probably won't leave class next week. Like I rarely, I've never heard really of students, like I've been teaching here 10 years for over like 5,000 different students, and I never got an email going like midway through the semester, oh, I got offered a job, so I quit school. You know, it's not something that commonly happens. You might wait till the end of the semester and then drop out or something, but like quit midway because you got offered a job is pretty rare. So that's why I wouldn't consider most of you guys as unemployed because of that reason. And if I think about your official status, like most students here spend more time in study purposes than work purposes. Some of you might be balanced half-half. Like you might be working 20, 30 hours a week while studying like 3, 4, or 5 classes. But then you're kind of like in that gray area, you know, like it's just... You're employed as well, yeah. But you could be employed working 10 hours, but this is whatever is your main kind of thing, you know, so, yeah. But to me, the people that are employed or unemployed here are mostly like full-time employed or wanting to find full-time work, you know, kind of situation. Yes?
When it's time to calculate the unemployment rate, who decides in which category I am?
That's a good question. I don't think it's a decision about how they see you. I think it's based on how you kind of like announce yourself in a certain way. Like if you think of income taxes at the end of the year, like you declare that you're a student and you had like student fees and so on. So that's what they kind of look at in a certain way. Like it's not there's no one person looking through a list of names and going like, what did this person do last year? And then like pick it off, and it would take forever. So it's more based on things that are kind of like given to the government in a certain way. if you're unemployed and you're like seeking unemployment benefits, well, you're in the system, like you're registered, you know, like the government sees that. And if you're employed, your employer has registered you in the system as well. Like when you get a job, you have to give your social insurance number. Well, they're kind of tracking you as soon as you do that. So those are well tracked in a certain way. Unless you're self-employed, that's more like a gray area again, but still. You know.
Still on income taxes.
It will be, yeah, but it might not get tracked right away. As when you get employed, like they'll typically ask you a series of things. Like I know if I hire a TA, well, they have to give their social insurance number and everything else to be able to be hired by Bishop's University. You know, so that's some form of tracking there. Yeah. Good questions. You guys are getting like specific. I'll never ask a specific question like that, but I'm always happy to answer them in class. Okay, so. The big thing to keep in mind in this whole story, though, to come back to this idea of unemployment rate and how this calculation may be skewed a little bit, is it does not account for discouraged workers. They're not in there. Like, it's not in this calculation. Like, you don't add the discouraged workers or the students or whatever into this calculation here. So starting from my situation of 5 million unemployed and 95 million employed, if 2 million of these unemployed people either get discouraged and stop looking for work, or they decide, I'm going back to school and everything else stays the same. Here there's 2 million people that say, I'm going to go back to school. Well, all of a sudden, what's going to happen to the numbers next year if nothing else changes? Well, we'll have 3 million unemployed. We'll still have our 95 million employed. My labor force, which was 95 plus 5 was 100, is now 98 because it's 95 plus 3. But overall, my unemployment rate would be equal to 3 over 98. We said this was 5% over here. Well, this will be slightly above 3%. It will be 3-something%. Okay. So that's why I say that the unemployment rate on its own could be slightly faulty at times. And that's why you want to not only look at the unemployment rate, but you want to look at other things, such as the amount of people with jobs. Because this would make you think that, let's say I became a politician and I started in this situation, and at the end of my term, I'm in this situation. I could say during the time I was prime minister, unemployment rate went down from 5% to 3%. I created a lot of jobs, blah, blah, blah. I didn't create any jobs. We have the same amount of people working.
Maybe you put incentives towards job searching, or like
But in this case here, there hasn't been. You know, and I'm talking about this case. It could be truth in another case, but in this case here, the number of people with jobs hasn't changed. Right? There's 95 million in both cases. I didn't create any new jobs. Maybe there's some people lost jobs and new jobs got created, but on the net, there's the same amount of workers as before when I started. So for me to kind of boast myself by saying that during my time there, I went to a situation where we now have lower unemployment rate because I created more jobs would be false. You know, I didn't create more jobs. But the unemployment rate went down in this case because people got discouraged or they decided to go back to school. So different things might have different impacts on the unemployment rate, but they don't paint a complete picture. So we'll come back to the more classic example I give you guys on the exam, which deals with two politicians in a second. But like, if we think about, it's kind of bad, good timing at the same time. This pandemic, it allows us to give like real world examples based on what's going on. So if we think about what's going on this year, what are the different things that kind of have an impact on the labor force that are not normally there in normal times? What changed? Yeah, and what kind of impact do we expect it to have? Yes?
I don't know how to say in English, but
PCU, yeah.
PCU, right?
Yeah, so PCU, which is Serb in English. I don't know what Serb stands for, but PCU, PCU, I believe, in French, and Serb in English. Does anyone here know what it stands for? I haven't taken advantage of it, so I don't know. It's the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit. So, Programme canadien, Prestation canadienne d'urgence. Exactly, yeah. So, not clearly a good translation, but still, like it's good enough. So, Prestation canadienne d'urgence and Canada Emergency Relief Benefit. So, we have this situation here that kind of came into play that's not normally there. With this, what kind of impact do you think something like this can have? So we don't do graphs in this chapter of unemployment. We could, but we don't. We see enough in this class. But what would you think would have an impact if there was graphs, or what would shift? What would do?
You got that technically in the labor force, everyone's looking for a job who's unemployed. But now the problem is that with this invention, a lot of people just fake looking for a job. They just recite this invention.
Yeah, exactly. So, faking it or whatever. What any kind of like lucrative unemployment benefits will increase the appeal of being unemployed. Let's say so. This makes being unemployed less bad. So less. So, or more, not more appealing, like you don't want to be unemployed, but like it's more financially advantageous to be unemployed than before this program was introduced.
Or just work certain hours.
Uh,
You can collect certain work or reduced hours.
okay.
So you could in theory double dip.
You can't?
You can.
You can or you can't?
So I think there's a magic number of how many hours you can work on CERB.
Yeah, okay.
Because there's a provision saying if your hours get reduced because of COVID,
Yeah.
you can still claim your 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a good chunk of people reduced, since all the stores were reducing their hours, people also reduced their hours.
Yeah.
And also got to serve on top to what they would make
Yeah.
on their increased COVID salary.
Yeah. No, it's more financially advantageous than before PCU CERB, than before this program was introduced. So we're just going to move aside from typical discussions from this class and move towards like how to create proper incentives, which is a little bit what you're getting at there. And I think like the government sometimes has a good goal, but sometimes the way, like the thing we have to keep in mind is people will often try to find the way to gain the most possible, like for sure. So like in your case, a lot of people found a way to kind of discuss with their employer to say like keep my hours to a certain level to make sure I keep on double dipping, enjoying both benefits. So the problem with a program like this, that you can work up to a certain amount of hours and not be penalized, and then afterwards, was it penalized like $1 per dollar, or you lose the 2,000 entirely?
You just lose it all.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, a program like that is not well structured.
Well, it depends, because like also if say for example, like if your job, say if your job got the wage subsidy,
Mm-hmm.
you are now you can't get the CERB.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. But let's ignore that for a second and just go back to the people who don't have the wage subsidy. If you have a program that allows you to work to a certain extent and then you lose all benefits, like obviously you can't really decide for your employer how many hours you work unless you can negotiate with them. But I find it's kind of silly that you can kind of like make more money up to a certain point, and then if you work more, it just drops to nothing. Like it reduces people's incentive to go back to work full time.
could that have not been the point though? They wanted people to stay home.
Yeah, not quite. Like there's other ways of doing it. Like no, I wouldn't. That wasn't the point necessarily, because some of those jobs you could have been maybe doing it, working it from it remotely. Maybe not working at a grocery store, but like there's some jobs that maybe you had access to serve that you could be working remotely. So that's not. Huh?
They weren't effective.
True. Yeah, you're right about that.
Not the target of the PC.
No, but at the same time, having that cutoff, for me, I'm not the biggest fan of it. Like for me, like when I was doing my PhD, or there's other instances where you get like government grants. Well, when there's a situation where if you decide to work, for every dollar that you earn, they reduce your grant by $1. To me, it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to give me a $30,000 grant, and then I could work and make 5, 10, 20,000, but end up with the exact same amount of money, why would I work? You know, so programs like that have like a cutoff right away, it just removes the incentives to work, legally speaking, because you're much better off earning $30,000 with your grant and maybe doing a few jobs on the side that are not declared than declaring any of your work, you know? So you always have to keep in mind the implications that it might have. Anyways, coming back to this. So this probably made more people stick to this category a little longer, okay? Like, I'm all for a social net, and I'm all for like helping people in need. So I don't want to go to the structure of a fully capitalist country and not have any advantages, for sure. But like creating programs like that, the problem with it sometimes is that it creates makes this situation more appealing, so it reduces people's effort to actually find something else. Because like the whole summer, they were struggling to find people to work on farms and everything else, and they were trying to work on different programs to incentivize that. But if people are earning like lots of money, staying at home doing nothing, like are they really going to go out and work and end up with pretty much the same amount of money? It was like, most people I spoke to that are like of your age or a little older were all like, why would we go and work and earn the same amount of money? You know, we could just stick at home. Yeah.
And some of the wages were a lot less too, working on a farm, picking up strawberries.
Exactly. So
You might not get your $2,000 and work 80 hours that week.
exactly. So it's something that needs to be considered. So if ever you study more in economics and you work for the government, make sure you consider all that stuff, because sometimes some of the programs that they set up are not well structured, I find. Anyway, so any social net benefits, unemployment benefits, will lead to a higher unemployment rate. If you were to cut out all unemployment benefits, saying Canada's struggling financially, you can't have access to employment insurance or PCU or anything anymore, you could be for sure that a lot of people would have jumped and gone to the farms this summer. If you had no money coming in, if you didn't work at some of those random jobs during the summer and you would have struggled to feed yourself, you would have done it. Like, and no program in place definitely leads to smaller unemployment rates, because you have a greater incentive to go back to work as quickly as possible. Which leads to some of the discussions about unemployment. So what are the natural forms of unemployment? Because not all unemployment are bad. So the natural forms of unemployment, it's frictional and structural unemployment. This is one of the areas where both textbooks I used over the last 10 years have a slightly different view on it. The frictional part's the same, the structural part is slightly different. So I'll explain what the frictional is, and then I'll say what the structural is for the two different textbooks. And if you use structural to mean one of the two, it's fine by me. Like, it will be good. Like, both make sense. Frictional, anyone here know what the frictional unemployment is? So that could be an easy multiple choice type question. Yeah?
It's when, say you wait to find the perfect job.
Exactly.
And then, it's to find like the perfect job with the right contract.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily finding the perfect job, and it's not necessarily a specific time frame. It's really just the time that you allocate yourself to finding a good match. So it's a matching kind of problem. And to me, the example I often think about when I think about this is, imagine you've been dating the same person for 3, 4, 5 years. And all of a sudden, you're single. Like, well, you all of a sudden, the first girl or guy that you meet that's single and is more or less appealing, you'll go like, okay, this is my new girlfriend. Like right away, like this is the person I'm with. You know, like you'll take a bit of time, you'll be single for a while, you'll kind of see what's your self-worth now, like what can you get, You'll try to figure it out, you'll try to see what's available. And you'll take a bit of time before kind of like diving into another relationship, you know. So it takes a bit of time, and you'll try to evaluate how much you're worth and so on, like in the singles market. So that's the same kind of matching idea there. The structural side of things, I kind of like the viewpoint of the past textbook I used to use, which was the Reagan textbook on this. The structural side of thing, they for them, the way they describe it is more a structural problem in the sense that, let's say in the 70s, 80s, there was a lot of textiles industries like in Magog and other areas. And then all of a sudden with globalization, a lot of textile industries went to Asia. And all of a sudden, all those people that were working in that industry for like 20 years and were experts in that industry no longer had the skills to do other jobs because that job that they were doing was no longer available. So from a structural point of view, they had to be retrained to be beneficial for the job market again. So retraining, and otherwise, maybe the location that you're working in, there's not much value for you, but elsewhere in Quebec or Canada, there's value. It might be relocation as well. It's a structural problem. So this one takes a little bit more time to fix, and is a little bit tricky, but it's something that happens, and it's something that will happen over time and time again. Like there's certain industries that are doing really well now, and with automation, AI, and everything else in 10, 20 years, like you won't get a job in that. Like machines will replace you. Like without being like a robot, it's gonna be like a machine that just does all the accounting for you, or like maybe a machine that does like your eye exam without you having to see an optometrist or whatever. So
Would you still be considered unemployed, or would you be considered not in the labor force?
you know, you're still considered unemployed if you're searching for an alternative job.
But you're forming yourself, training yourself for a future.
During the training process, it depends if it's like a training process, like a very short-lived one. Like if it's just like an Excel course on the weekend, well then I wouldn't say you're out of the labor force for a weekend and then you're back on. But if you go back to school, obviously you're no longer in the labor force. Yeah. But if it's a short-term kind of training, because that's what, like I only been unemployed once in my life. It was a very short period of time between when I was teaching snowboarding in Ferdy and I was starting my PhD in Montreal. And during that short period of time, you had to have like a meeting from time to time, and like they had like all these job boards, and they had like all these kind of courses you could do like on Excel and stuff like that to make sure that in those days, those were like positive attributes to have on your CV, so they would offer you those services. So if we think from a government standpoint, those two things that we described, well, how could the government reduce that level of unemployment? Well, obviously for the frictional, like I said, if they remove all the social programs, it's going to remove this because you're going to try to find that match as soon as possible. You won't wait like 6 months to find that perfect job match if you need that money to survive. But that's not necessarily the best solution from a society standpoint if you want people to match jobs that are good for them. But what you can do is having like, and you'll see this if you become unemployed and you go to Service Canada, they'll try to have like different websites or different tools available to you to be able to see what jobs are currently available in your region. So they'll try to track that and make it as easy as possible for you to find a job. So that's a tool there. And for structural, it will be finding ways to retrain in short-term programs people so that they can work as quickly as possible. Where this textbook differs, they talk about structural unemployment based on minimum wage laws, efficiency wages, and unions. And if I were to put all of those three together, essentially what they're saying is there's structural unemployment based on a situation where the equilibrium wage based on the demand for labor, like I said, I don't do graphs in this chapter and I kind of lied, but you don't need to know this graph or anything. I'm just going to show it really quick. And the supply of labor, so these are wages and this is the quantity of workers. Well, normally, based on the amount of people willing to work and the amount of people looking for that type of educated whatever worker, there's going to be an equilibrium wage. Okay? In most industries, you have an equilibrium wage. And an equilibrium wage, like any other equilibrium in macroeconomics, is a situation where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded, which we coin market clearing. Like everyone that wants a job and everyone that wants to hire someone is finding it at that current wage. There's not an excess of one or the other. If the wage, on the other hand, is higher than this market clearing wage, well, now you have a situation where the quantity of workers that are willing to work at that wage is greater than the quantity demanded. So you have what we call an excess supply of workers. This is no longer market clearing because you have people that are searching for work at that wage, want to find a job at that wage, but there's less employers that want to hire at that higher wage. Difference between market clearing and non-market clearing is you no longer have a situation that quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. You have a disconnect. Why do we have a higher wage than the free market wage? Well, minimum wage laws will lead to that situation, because if it wasn't for minimum wage laws, you probably would get paid less than what the minimum wage is right now in certain industries. And then otherwise, unions is when you have a situation that unions is in French syndicat. When you're syndicat, when you're unionized, you're able to negotiate better wages over time, better advantages. So you're kind of paid a little bit more than what you would be paid if there wasn't a union in place potentially. And efficiency wages are the interesting one for me. That's why I'm focusing on that one last. The idea behind efficiency wages is this is how much the industry is paying. This is how much I will pay my workers because I want the best. I want to find the best, most efficient workers. But as soon as you do that, maybe other people will follow through or everyone's going to want to work for you, and it's going to create, once again, this disconnect between quantity supply and quantity demanded. But efficiency wages, the idea behind it is to pay a little bit more to find the best workers that are efficient and that they'll want to keep working for you so they won't leave, so you won't have to retrain workers all the time. So it's efficient. It's much better in the end. So that's the whole idea behind that. So ManQ would say, the textbook that's associated with this class now, would say that there is structural unemployment due to one of these three reasons. That there's this disconnect between the quantity of workers that want to work and the quantity demanded, so there is some unemployment there, some structural unemployment. So if you want to see it that way too, that's fine. Or you could see it as a separate category, but that's how they call it. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
We may get one, but it's combined the theory that we learned in chapter 8 and chapter 9.
That's perfect.
We agree that PCU or SERP will create a budget deficit, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last chapter, you said that when the government had a budget
Deficit?
yes, the interest rate goes up.
Yeah.
And now what we saw is that interest rate goes down.
I mentioned that last class. I mentioned that I will mention why that's not the case in the future last class. So I didn't give you the answer of why that's the case, but we'll see how they can do that later when we talk about monetary policy. So that's what I said in last class, and I say it again. So I'm just pushing the answer to further, like just pushing the dirt under the table. But yeah, so it's something that's going to be discussed, because your intuition is great to think that if the government goes into a budget deficit on its own, has a tendency to increase interest rates because there's less money available for loans of anyone who wants to borrow money who's not the government. So that's totally right to think that. The flip side, though, that we'll see is the whole idea of how money is, monetary policy and introduction of money and everything else could have an impact on interest rates, how the overnight interest rate has an impact on rates that commercial banks use and everything else. So that's kind of like another tool that they have up their sleeve. So they're the two main ones. Like, it's not like they have 20 of them, but it's something we'll discuss later on. Yeah. Cool. Anything else? Yeah.
How about old people and young people? In which category they are?
Old or young, it doesn't matter. If you're in the working age, you're kind of like in this category here. If you're working, it doesn't matter.
How about
15 and older.
Yeah, it's 15 and older to be in the working age. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's, for some reason, I think it might be 70 or something else. The upper limit, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, if you're working, well, you have to be considered employed. Like, we have employees here that are above 70, which are employed. So we have that kind of situation. So obviously, they can't not be considered not in the working age. But yeah, if they're retired, you're not in the labor force anything anymore. Like, you're kind of gone there. So, and at the end of the day, whether you're retired at 55 or you're retired and you're 75, each of them will have the same impact on the unemployment rate. Both of them, you're kind of outside of it. Yeah, it doesn't really change much. So, retired is retired. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. In Quebec, we have a weird, well, not weird. It's okay, but I find once again, it's all about the incentives sometimes. And some of these people may not be money driven, but here at Bishop's, I shouldn't be saying this, but like at other universities as well, like not just here. In Quebec, when you have a professor that's like above 70, the thing that's interesting for them is that in Quebec, you're forced to start taking your pension at the age of 70. So they're fully retrieving their pension, and they no longer have to contribute to their pension, and they're getting paid their full salary at the same time. So like, you're like crazy double dipping there, and you're making a lot of money, and you're like over 70. Like, what are you gonna do with all that money? Anyways, but sometimes they should leave room for the younger ones, I guess. But yeah, so that's an issue for sure. But it's just so attractive when you could be double dipping instead of having the situation that you're not really gaining anything from working more. They are gaining big time. So yeah, anyways. So that's one of the other policies that might be slightly wrong. And then we don't have any laws in Canada that can allow us to fire someone that's like beyond 70. Like, it's a weird thing, because like our job is to educate you guys and do the research, and like if I'm above 70, I could still do that, even though I could be doing it slower or not as well, not as technology advanced. If you could still do it, there's no reason that you can be fired. So I'm kind of bulletproof till I'm like 80 here or something. Probably won't be here till 80, but yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
During the pandemic, there's been like a lot of people have been referring to like the she session.
The what?
The she session. Like a lot of moms having to stay home.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I'm not pronouncing it right, but like, so are now those people, these moms who aren't employed anymore, they can't really look for work because they've said they're going to stay home. Are they now discouraged workers?
Yeah, the people who decide to, like, let's say you're a worker who has like 3 kids, like someone I know has 3 kids, and she said, like, well, in the fall, if they start getting ill and I have to keep one at home from time to time, I might as well just keep all 3 and do homeschooling. Well, obviously, if she's giving up all work potential and doing homeschooling, she wouldn't be able to be counted as employed or unemployed anymore. She'd be not looking for work. Yeah. The big difference between not in labor force and unemployed is actively searching a more or less full-time job. So if you give up your full-time job to take care of your kids, you're not gonna seek another full-time job. You're full-time homeschooling.
What if it's due to another externality, like the daycares that went on strike for a month, like family daycares?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, you
That-
want work,
Yeah, that'd be.
you're on call, but you
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That one's trickier to answer. You're not looking for work now, but it's not you that decides when you decide to go back to work in that case. So it's you're
On call.
you're on call. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Like I said, like there's clear black and white, and then there's all the gray stuff, and that's where all the questions come up, and it's cool, but it's tricky to answer. It's not always clear cut. Cool. All right. Getting to the kind of question that I always ask, I'll ask you guys here. I won't give you the answer. It is partly in your notes. And if you work it through, I kind of semi-worked it through here. You should be able to figure it out. There's 2 versions of this question. There's only 2. The names might change. Like I always use different kind of versions of the current politician in power, but you have 2 politicians. And one's gonna say, so like I sometimes use the word like Trudeau modified, so Trude something. And you'll have the leader of the opposition. Who is the leader of the opposition? Who did they elect in Conservative Party now? O'Toole. All right. So you have O'Toole something. Okay. So you have the 2 politicians, and they'll be able to say 2 different things. And the question is, can both be saying the truth? And the answer is yes, but you have to prove it. So Trudeau says that over the course of his tenure, he could say that there's been a drop in the unemployment rate. And O'Toole says there's also been a drop of the number of people employed. Can both be telling the truth, or it could be an increase in both. Like it doesn't really matter which direction you go, but it's something that sounds impossible or false, that one of them must be lying. So if you answer one of them is definitely lying because they're politicians and politicians all lie, well, even though that's a possibility, it's not the answer I'm looking for. Okay, so don't answer that, because the general impression would be that if the number of people with jobs has gone down, the unemployment rate has to have gone down as well. Because if you think about this equation here, if the amount of people with jobs goes down, the numerator becomes bigger. Even though they become discouraged, it still becomes, it becomes smaller, and this stays the same. So this whole number is going to be bigger. And if those employed people become unemployed, it's not going to change the denominator, but this is going to become bigger, so it has to become bigger. So as people lose their jobs, or the amount of people unemployed goes down, you would normally expect the unemployment rate to also go up, not down. So quickly you would say one of them must be lying. But there is a possibility for both to be telling the truth. And you have to be able to show this mathematically. And the big error above the one saying that one politician must be lying, the other big error I get in this question is the numbers that use, and there's a very precise reason why I ask you guys to use numbers in this question here, because sometimes some people, their explanation looks good, and then they use numbers, and I could see that they still didn't get it. What I mean by that is the other big error that I get is someone will say, Well, there's 200,000 people that lost their jobs, but 300,000 got new jobs. Okay, but that's not what this guy is saying. This person is saying the number of people employed has gone down. So if there's 200,000 job loss and 300,000 that got a job, well, there has been an increase in that 100,000 employed. You haven't answered mathematically with respect to the question. So keep that in mind. So don't do that. The way you do this is always based on discouraged workers or workers going back to school. So the only way that this can happen is if there's a second thing that happens at the same time. If, as a number of workers get unemployed, that were employed become unemployed, a bunch of unemployed people, or even those people become discouraged and go back to school, or get discouraged and go somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there has to be something else that happens. So maybe there's 200,000 people that lose their job, but at the same time, there's like 1 million people that were unemployed that decided to go back to school. You have to combine two things that happen at the same time. Because we saw before here in this example here, that here I didn't change the number of people with work. I only changed the number of people looking for work or going back to school, and that changed my unemployment rate. Here I'm changing the number of people that have work, and unemployment rate is changing, but the only way that instead of going up here, it is going down, is through a process like this that happens at the same time. Okay. I gave you the question. Like, I didn't write it all out, but that is the question. Like, either both go down or they both go up. It's been there like 60 to 99% of the time the last few years. So make sure you work it out and you know how to do it.
Is that the only two cases? Like,
Both up or both down?
Yeah.
Yeah, for that question, yeah. Yeah, they'll either both say that this person will say, like, this person can say to Trudeau that has been in power, the unemployment rate has gone up, and this guy can say, well, the number of people with jobs has also gone up, which sounds counterintuitive. Like, this and the other one sounds counterintuitive, but it can happen due to people shifting either in or out of the labor force. This one, probably they'll have to leave the labor force. In the other case, it might be some people entering. And once again, if you have people enter the labor force and you say all those people have a job, the number of people employed can't go down. That's a common issue. Like I said, like, number of people is number of people. It's not like 200,000 that were in the labor force lost their job, but like 1 million came into the labor force with a job. That will be wrong, because on the net, you have an increase of 800,000 people that are employed. So make sure you work it out and you have those two things work. It's not that complicated, but you just have to understand all of this well, and you'll be able to set it up. Once you're able to do it both directions, you are golden for that question. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So, as always, for these hybrid classes, I go and cover what I have to cover the applications with you guys. If there's no other questions or comments, we'll leave it to that. And in the past few weeks, I've always had people come see me one-on-one afterwards. So if you want to come see me, ask me questions one-on-one, feel free. Otherwise, have a good week. Have a good Thanksgiving next week. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.